let's talk about the developments that have been going on with the ongoing cases that have been looking into what happened at Nord Stream 2 all the way back on in September of 2022. So it's been almost 2 years since the now famous explosions that ruptured Nord Stream 2, which was a pipeline going from Russia to Germany supplying natural gases. At the time, it seemed to be an act of sabotage, and there was a lot of different fingers pointing in many different directions. Of course, at the time, the EU and other member states were talking about how it was a Russian act of sabotage, which was done to destabilize the West, who would become increasingly dependent on Russian natural gas for its own resources, and as a way to basically put them into a crisis mode come winter of 2022. Now, there was quite a lot of contention as to whether this was the case, but this is certainly something that we were fed at the time. On the Wikipedia page, I noticed that it pointed out here, and you can check the links on here to verify this information. So in October of 2022, less than a month after this initially happened, Russia had confirmed that Pipe B of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline had escaped destruction and offered to resume gas supply to Europe. Now, that was going to be on the basis of resuming payment, because there'd been a number of disruptions to Nord Stream 1 since the middle of 2021 due to some issues with the pipeline and also due to concerns of non-payment of the rubles that were owed in return for the gas supplies. But it was declined by Berlin because, of course, they were all in on the Ukraine effort, and as far as I'm aware, still are. But for a country that supposedly did it themselves, this seemed to be strange behavior. And there were a lot of questions asked over whether Russia, who would have had a great position of leverage over the West if it was in control of, as it was in Germany, about 55% of its natural gas supplies come the winter, why they would choose to sabotage their own infrastructure, which they'd put billions and billions of dollars into, as had the Western states that had collaborated with them, when instead they could have simply, as they had done with the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, turn it off. And then the infrastructure is still there in the future for once peacetime has resumed and you can carry this on, or again, you can use it as a point of leverage for the Western states. It seemed like a very strange conclusion to come to, as far as I can tell, if you think it through logically.
Okay, I am not speaking a lot about this war because I would rather it had never started.
No, of course. I think we're all in that same position.
And I have said that I have friends that I haven't spoken to in a while due to this. But I will say this, that, obviously, whoever did it, it's very unlikely that Russia did it. And that's not a justification for what Russia is doing. Not at all. But you just don't destroy your own means of exerting influence upon upon states like the EU states.
Yes, especially seeing as some of the EU states had already been complaining for a long time about Russia dependence on Russian natural resources because of the fact that they saw Russia as a potential aggressor state ever since 2014.
Yes, but Germany was basing its entire economy on cheap Russian gas.
Puts them in a pretty vulnerable position.
Yes, so I see no reason why Russia would want to destroy that pipeline.
Especially because, again, they could have just not used it.
Turn
they could
it
have
off.
switched it off.
Yeah, but that's the question. Why would they not? Why would they turn it off? Because the sanctions hadn't already taken place. The sanction, if I'm not radically mistaken, just tell me.
Well, by September, certainly the sanctions had already been in place.
I think the sanctions took place after after the Nord Stream thing. But maybe I'm totally
Nord
mistaken.
Stream 2 itself had never been in a position to deliver any gas. The infrastructure was complete, but it hadn't been switched on. It contained gas at the time of the explosion, which is why it released so much methane at the time. There was lots of videos going around of the surface of the water above it bubbling up, which was the methane escaping. But they'd never actually used it to deliver any gas because by the time the infrastructure was completed, the war had begun. And there was they were not in a position to begin delivering that gas. By the way, as I mentioned, at the time, there was a lot of fingers being pointed. Ukraine immediately accused Russia of causing leaks in two major gas pipelines, which it described as a terrorist attack. Ukrainian presidential advisor Mykola Podolyak I'm not going to pronounce these names correctly. That's a warning straight away. I know how to pronounce Putin, and I know how to pronounce Zelensky, and that's all I need. He said that the damage to Nord Stream 1 and 2 was an act of aggression toward the EU. He added that Russia wanted to cause pre-war winter panic and urged the EU to increase military support for Ukraine. He also tweeted in English saying, "Gas leak from the NS1 Nord Stream 1 is nothing more than a terrorist attack planned by Russia and an act of aggression toward the EU. Russia wants to destabilize the economic situation in Europe and cause pre-winter panic." And as I mentioned, Europe at the time, and particular Germany, had become increasingly reliant on Russian gas to meet its energy needs. Wholesale prices of gas in Europe after the Nord Stream attack had more than doubled, and that was after also the time where, since the beginning of the war when the sanctions were enacted, and since Russia had switched off some of the gas and natural resource supplies, that price doubled. Gas prices in the UK, if you all remember, there was the worries at the end of 2022 whether grandma was going to freeze to death because she wouldn't be able to afford it, even though it imports no gas from Russia because the shortages has severely affected the international gas market. That's why it affected us. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, as I mentioned, Germany relied on Russia for 55% of its gas. That was back when this originally happened. So what has been the developments since then? Well, there have been quite a few. This is one catching us up a little bit towards the beginning of the year, back in February of 2024, talking about what had gone on in the months and years since then. And it says in here, some US and European officials initially suggested that Moscow had blown up its own pipelines, an interpretation dismissed as idiotic by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Instead, Putin blamed the Anglo-Saxons, which is the US and the UK. Without providing evidence, he also blamed Ukraine. All three countries deny any role. The White House last year dismissed a blog post by a US investigative journalist alleging that Washington was behind the explosions as utterly false and complete fiction. The US opened a new the US and German media have reported that the yacht could have been, there was reports of a particular yacht that the German investigation into this, which is at the time being right now, still the only investigation that's ongoing. All of the other international investigations have stopped and concluded by now. Germany is still going with it, obviously, because it was their resources that have been prevented from getting to them, and it was part of their infrastructure project to begin with. They reported that they found a yacht that could have been used by a Ukrainian or pro-Ukrainian group, citing leaked intelligence reports and people familiar with official investigations. Kiev has repeatedly denied any involvement with this. It goes on to give some other information about the infrastructure project itself. Nord Stream 2 was fully owned by Gazprom, which is a Russian company, but Western companies, British Shell, Germany's Wintershall D and Uniper, and French Engie and Austria's OMV covered 50% of the pipeline's total construction costs of about $11 billion.
Sorry, I have to make a quick correction to what I said before. The Nord Stream pipeline explosions occurred on September 26, 2022, which was after several rounds of sanctions had been imposed on Russia. So apologies for what I said before.
No, absolutely. Thank you for clearing that up for us. There have been no plans announced since then to repair the damage. In July of last year, 2023, Germany told the UN Security Council that it had found traces of subsea explosives in a sailing yacht that may have been used to transport the explosives. This is the one that they've been investigating. Germany has confirmed its investigators raided a ship identified by German media as the 50-foot sailing yacht in January last year that may have been used to transport the explosives used to blow up the pipelines. The boat, leased in Germany via a Poland-registered company, contained traces of Octagon, the same explosive that was found at the underwater blast sites. Germany told the UN that it was possible for trained divers to attach explosives to the pipelines, laying about 70 to 80 meters deep where the explosions occurred. Because, of course, when it first happened, there was concern that it might have just been a fault, but then immediately after, they found evidence that it was caused by controlled explosions under the water. So this was the yacht that seemingly whoever conducted that operation had used to sail out to the waters to conduct it. A day after the explosions, on September 27, 2022, German magazine Der Spiegel wrote that the CIA had warned Germany in summer of 2022 about possible attacks on Baltic Sea pipelines. The Washington Post, citing leaked information posted online, wrote last June that the United States learned of a Ukrainian plan to attack the Nord Stream natural gas pipelines 3 months before they were damaged. The intelligence report was based on information provided by a source in Ukraine, the Post said, according to the CIA, adding that the CIA had shared it with Germany and other European countries in June 2022. So, judging by this information here, if you were to believe the Washington Post's information, they point to it being actually an operation conducted by and with approval of Ukraine, which is quite a damning accusation, but we'll carry on. The Dutch national broadcaster NOS reported the same month that the tip came from the Dutch military intelligence agency MIVD. According to the Post, the CIA relayed to Zaluzny, I think that's how you pronounce his name, who was the Ukrainian commander-in-chief general at the time, through an intermediary that the United States opposed such an operation. In November of last year, the Washington Post reported that a man called Roman Chavinsky, a former intelligence official who served in the Ukrainian military special forces, managed the 6-person team but did not plan the attack. He denied involvement. The Post said Chavinsky took orders from senior Ukrainian officials who ultimately reported to Commander-in-Chief General Valery terrible at these names, Zaluzny. Reuters was unable to verify the report independently, and Zaluzny had made no public comment. Germany's Der Spiegel and ZDF have said that a group of 6 people, 5 men and 1 woman, boarded the yacht, which was called Andromeda, in Rostock, Germany on September 6th using forged passports and returned to Rostock on September 23rd. The yacht was spotted at a small Danish island of Cristiano near the explosion sites on September 16th to 18th and made a short stop at a marina in Kolobrzeg, Poland, on September 19th before returning to Germany. There was no evidence to suggest that Poland was used as a hub for the sabotage, Polish prosecutors said last year. So that's a lot of information. There's a lot of information there, and a lot of it is coming from different sources, and there is not any evidence really being presented to confirm any of it other than anonymous sources and hearsay. But what's been going on since then, since February, is that this came out in the news as of yesterday, Wednesday, the 14th of August, 2024. Germany has issued an arrest warrant for a diver over the Nord Stream blasts, according to reports. This was issued back in June, and it's being issued to a Ukrainian man who was supposedly one of the team that planted explosives on pipelines in September in 2022. Supposedly, he may have been the man who had been driving a van that got them to the yacht. And there's information that he may have been snapshotted when speeding at 80 miles an hour in Poland, I think, and that's where they got his face. Very interesting.
They were going to enrich the pipeline.
Yes, clearly. Do you have anything to add to all of this so far, Jess?
Yeah, I'm not a foreign policy expert, so and it is a lot of information, so I do have a question. So is the accusation that it's from the Ukrainian government, or is it just a Ukrainian group that's done this?
So far, the Ukrainian government, as they would, has been completely denying all of the accusations. But the next article that we'll look at in a moment from the Wall Street Journal, which came out yesterday, but very late yesterday after this initial report came out, is saying that there may have been involvement by the Ukrainian government, but that high-ups like Zelensky were trying to prevent it from happening, but that essentially things had been put in motion that could not be taken out of motion by the time that they were trying to halt the bombing. Now, of course, this is all, again, coming from anonymous sources that the journal has been speaking to, and there's some information which doesn't seem to add up as far as I can tell, just giving a once and second look at the story as presented. But we'll go through, because this is important if it has ramifications for the Ukrainian war effort and ramifications for how trustworthy Ukraine as an ally in the West is if they are willing and able to sabotage infrastructure that is necessary for the well-being of other countries, even if, yes, you can say, rightfully so, it was foolish of Germany and other European nations to be so reliant on Russian natural resources.
Yeah, I don't think it's really any surprise that Ukraine is denying this, because of course they're going to deny the bad thing. But it just shows how even in something like the situation where Germany and other European countries have been so hospitable in funding for Ukraine, that something like this can happen. It's so eye-opening, and the idea that we've been told that if we don't fund this war, it will come back to bite us. Russia is going to take over the UK next if they do go after Ukraine. Well, this is already impacting us. This is already impacting our energy.
We do have to consider as well that Western elites do seem to have a real bloodthirsty streak against Russia. For whatever reason, I wouldn't speculate, because there was the Foreign Affairs report from earlier this year as well that was talking about the initial peace talks that were going on between Russia and Ukraine, where a lot seemed to be on the table that you wouldn't expect Russia to put up there, that seemed to have been sabotaged partially by involvement of Western leaders like Boris Johnson going in and telling Ukraine that no matter the circumstances, the UK will fully support the war effort, and also that Ukraine itself had been surprisingly successful in pushing back the initial Russian attacks, which gave it the confidence to believe that it could continue the war effort with Western support.
I have two things to add here. So first of all, it is very interesting that articles like this one are being published right now, because I don't think that something like this would have been published a year ago. No,
I agree.
So
that's a good point.
It's really interesting that right now they are publishing articles like this. Now,
well, in this next article, there's reports that Germany's investigative team were thinking that it might have been Germany as early as November of 2022. I think this might have something to do with the fact that the war in the Middle East, there seems to be some heating up going on with Iran. So there might be some trying to pull back resources from Ukraine and point them more in the direction of the Middle East.
It's like perhaps. Kanye with Taylor Swift would say, it's you may have won an award, but it's not your best award. It's like, it's not the best war. That's the issue. Yeah, that's the issue. But what is interesting is that right now they are publishing articles like this. And second, I think that just, my personal opinion, we will never know. Because there's the old saying that, in war, fraud and deception are virtues. The sad thing. So even if a particular side has seemingly no reason to do something like sabotage, that gives them an extra reason of doing it, because they're going to wreak havoc upon the other side. But no, these are just the two sides I'm trying to think of.
No, absolutely. It's good to be just level-headed and look at both sides.
I really don't think we will ever know, but it is interesting that articles like this, like these, are being published, because it seems to me that it is showing that people will, and politicians will, ask for a ceasefire. And I think that it's going to be a balance antebellum, as they say, that it's going to stop wherever the Russian borders are now and wherever Ukrainian borders are now. I think that's where it's going. But as far as the Nord Stream thing, I don't think we'll ever know.
Well, still, it's important to go over the information that we have available to us now, and we'll be able to, you at home will be able to make your own mind up as to how likely all of this does sound. So, going into this information, the German authorities have issued an arrest warrant for a Ukrainian man on suspicion of being part of the team. The man, a driving instructor identified only as, and brace yourselves for this, Volodymyr Z.
I mean, Volodymyr
I'm sure that's a very common name and set of initials, but that's quite interesting. Although, of course, I don't think Zelensky is a driving instructor who was involved in all of this.
He was a comedian, wasn't he?
He was a comedian.
Maybe he was playing a driving instructor.
It all makes sense now. So he's last believed to have lived in Poland and is alleged to have dived 80 meters to the seabed at night to plant explosive devices on the pipelines which ran from Russia to Germany in September 2022. According to reports in two publications I'm not going to try to pronounce, as well as the broadcaster ARD, Germany first asked Poland to arrest the man in June, but he is thought to have gone underground, according to security sources cited in the reports. The German Prosecutor General's office, which has been investigating the case even after Denmark and Sweden dropped their respective inquiries, has declined to comment. Polish authorities confirmed on Wednesday that a European warrant for his arrest has been received. The National Public Prosecutor's Office said in an email to the news agency AFP, ultimately, Volodymyr Z has not been detained as he left the territory of Poland at the beginning of July this year, crossing the Polish-Ukrainian border. So if this is to be believed, this man has returned to Ukraine, and Ukraine does not extradite its own, so there would be no chance of Germany getting hold of him unless he decided to leave Ukraine for some reason, which would be unlikely. The media outlets also identified another man and woman who are also Ukrainian diving instructors as having allegedly been involved in the attack, though no further arrest warrants have been issued for them. I need to correct myself earlier. Vladimir Z was a diving instructor, not driving instructor. I misspoke. Apologies, I misread that. Despite evidence that he may have had the backing of high-ranking military officials, there's no suggestion that Ukrainian President Zelensky was aware of the attack or that it was state-sanctioned. Now, that in itself is contradicted by this enormous Washington Post article that purports to give the full story of what happened and says that it was funded by private businessmen at a cost of around $300,000 and was overseen by a top general. That would be General, let me try and get his name right again, Zaluzny. And that President Zelensky was actually aware of it, but unsuccessfully tried to call it off. There was also the suggestion in this article that the idea was come up with in May of 2022 and was the result of a excessive drinking session among senior Ukrainian military officers, where somebody suggested destroying Nord Stream in response to the remarkable success that Ukraine had had at the time in halting the Russian invasion. This seems to be a very strange and unlikely circumstance to come up with such an idea that then gets followed through as well. So that's very strange to begin with. So, again, it goes on to say it cost around $300,000. It involved a small rented yacht, that would be the Andromeda, with a 6-member crew, including trained civilian divers. One was a woman, whose presence helped to create the illusion that they were a group of friends on a pleasure cruise. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky initially improved the plan, according to one officer who participated and 3 people familiar with it, because the journal say that they spoke to 4 senior Ukrainian defense and security officials who either participated in or had direct knowledge of the plot. All of them said the pipelines were a legitimate target in Ukraine's war defense against Russia. I do not know why these people would have chosen to speak to the journal about it. Perhaps it's been playing on their conscience so much, or perhaps they were at a excessive drinking session and decided to spill the beans on such an operation. So perhaps there's been some leaks from the inside. But either way, according to this information, the CIA learned of it and asked the Ukrainian president to pull the plug. He ordered a halt, these people said. Zelensky's commander-in-chief, Zaluzny, was leading the effort and nonetheless forged ahead. Why he would choose to do that against direct orders, I don't know. The Dutch military intelligence agency that was noted in the other articles, MIVD, learned of the plot and warned the CIA, not Germany. They went to the CIA instead, according to several people familiar with the Dutch report. And then the US informed Germany, which seems like a roundabout way of going about it when the US and the Dutch are in allies with Germany. Very strange. Portions of the account given to the journal were corroborated by a nearly 2-year German police investigation into the attack. Now, if we're going to believe any of the information that's been presented regarding this, I would say that the 2-year German police investigation is probably the most trustworthy one, and not just 4 random senior officials who decided to speak to the journal about such a thing, especially given that the 2-year German police investigation has in the end resulted in the issue of a warrant, or an arrest warrant for a man.
I don't know. It seems to me that it's all top down in this case. And the fact that they are publishing it suggests that they want to push forward a narrative of ceasefire.
Yeah, it's a narrative shift, especially if Trump ends up getting in. Trump wants to pull US support away from the Ukrainian effort. He said as much. He wants,
or at least he says so.
He says so. Yeah. But I do actually trust Trump on such things more than I trust most other politicians when they say certain things. And also, there's worries within the EU themselves, where somebody like Macron has been saying that they basically need to lessen their reliance on the US for military defense support and be able to build up their own army in case of Russian aggression. And they're not in a position to do that if this war carries on, and they still have to continue ramping up support for Ukraine. So there's a few different avenues that you could say, yes, they want to wind this thing down. But carrying on, they say that the German investigators questioned dozens of potential witnesses, scanned the bottom of the sea around the blast, and sifted through masses of data, including digital communication, travel records, and financial transactions. They had one lucky break, supposedly, in rushing to leave Germany. The sabotage crew neglected to wash the Andromeda, which gave the German detectives traces of explosive, fingerprints, and DNA samples from the crew, which I assume has all been part of why they were able to issue this arrest warrant. According to people familiar with the investigation, a van driving the Ukrainian sabotage team from Poland into Germany in 2022 was snapped by a German speed camera, and the man, the diving instructor, was in the photo. Authorities in Poland didn't act on the warrant, and as we mentioned before, he's ended up going into Ukraine, where they will not be able to extradite him. Regarding General Zaluzny, he's now Ukraine's ambassador to the United Kingdom. Supposedly, Zelensky chewed him out after this whole thing and demoted him, and he took this position instead, although this position as an ambassador means that he's got immunity on any charges. So if anything did end up coming back to him, according to these reports, according to these arrest warrants, he's, bloody hell, apologies, he's not able to be charged for anything anyway because he's got immunity. Supposedly, he was commanding the operation, enlisted Ukraine's top special operations officers, and then which included Roman Chavinsky, which is one of the names that was mentioned in the Nord Stream article and reported on by the Washington Post. And when they tried to call it off, the things were already in motion, so they couldn't call it off. So Chavinsky, interestingly, is currently on trial in Ukraine for unrelated charges. In July, he was released on bail after over a year in detention. He declined to comment on this case after people tried to get in touch with him about it. But in a subsequent broadcast interview, he said that the sabotage had two positive effects for Ukraine: helped loosen Russia's grip on the European countries supporting Kiev, and left Moscow with only one main avenue for channeling gas to Europe, pipelines traversing Ukraine. Despite the war, supposedly, Ukraine collects lucrative transit fees for Russian oil and gas, estimated to be worth hundreds of $millions a year. Now, that was not something I'm aware of. You can verify that in the comments if you'd like. Earlier this year, as it mentions, Zelensky ousted Zaluzny from his military post, and now he's the ambassador. Ukrainian officials, according to this article, who participated in or are familiar with the plot, believe that it would be impossible to put any of the commanding officers on trial because no evidence exists beyond conversations among the top officials who were, at least initially, in this drunken session where they came up with the plan to commit mass sabotage against one of their own allies, all in agreement about wanting to blow up the pipelines. None of them will testify lest they incriminate themselves. So I'm with you on this, Stelios, that this information is all very revealing, but also slightly unverifiable, and is in the interest of pushing the narrative in a particular direction, changing course, so to speak, with the Russia-Ukraine conflict as it stands right now. Especially convenient, given that nobody involved with it is in any way touchable by Western legal systems and being able to be brought to justice in front of a court where a lot more information would be brought out and we could truly verify how true any of this is. Also, another thing, it's fantastical to me that if any of this was true, that the US would not be able to put a stop to it if they were really not in favor of this going ahead. It's remarkable to the idea that the US would just say, no, don't do that, and not do anything to put a stop to it. If this really was an act of sabotage, I wouldn't be surprised if the US was involved. But again, we don't know. All of these reports have a lot of loose ends that can't be tied.
We don't know, but if that's the case, then they may publish articles of the sort in order to make the Ukrainians get all the blame, so they can tell them, we can end the war right now, and you're not gonna have any other ground back.
Sorry, repeat that for a moment.
If that's the case, and there is involvement from the other side of the Atlantic, then there is interest in publishing these articles in order to make Ukrainians take 100% of the blame.
Oh, yes.
That's what I said.
Absolutely.
If that's the case, that's a conditional.
Yes. So there's a lot up in the air about this, and I am in the agreement that unless any of these people are able to be miraculously extradited and put before a court where we can get them giving information, telling the truth of what happened in their own involvement, and not just anonymous reports being given by the Journal and other news sources, then it's very difficult to tell what happened. But I do think that the official narratives, certainly that we were given to begin with, that it was all to do with Russia, I think are unlikely.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can see behind the scenes from our obviously world-famous election stream, the British election stream. And it's a lot of fun. Definitely sign up and watch it. And if you want to see all the other things that we're putting out, we post links to all of them on our Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.